Excellencies, dear colleagues, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening to who has joined us online or will later watch this video. Welcome to this new session of the Geneva Nature-Based Solution Dialogues, co-convened by the Geneva Environment Network and the International Union for Conservation of Nature, which we refer to as IUCN. As I keep reminding in these dialogues, IUCN, headquartered in our region, is an essential global actor of our network, bringing together the world's most influential organizations and experts to conserve nature and accelerate the transition to a sustainable world. We have again the pleasure to have with us today leading experts from the network. These nature-based solution dialogues aim to facilitate further engagement and discussion among the stakeholders in international Geneva and beyond on the role and opportunities provided by nature-based solutions in the lead up to major environmental negotiations. Today, we are hosting the 7th dialogue of our series, and we will be focusing on building resilience. This week, on 13th of October, we will be celebrating the International Day for Disaster Risk Reduction. We have with us leading experts who will be speaking on the key role that nature-based solutions have in this context. We will also be welcoming a guest champion message that you will discover just before we start the discussion. And before I give the floor to Ali Raza Rizvi, who is the Global Coordinator for Adaptation and Disaster Risk Reduction at IUCN, who will be moderating today's session, let me remind you that the documents presented, the summary, as well as a video of the dialogue will be made available on the webpage of this event. We will share the link in the chat. So throughout the event, you can raise your questions by using the chat box. We will use your questions to feed the discussion after the presentations. With that, Ali, over to you.
Thank you, Diana, for the introduction. I am Ali Raza Rizvi. I oversee IUCN's global work on climate adaptation and disaster risk reduction. So I'm pleased to moderate this panel discussion, and we will be discussing current developments, opportunities on integrating nature-based solutions into disaster management. We will start with a brief initial introduction. I will share some of the slides with you, and then we will have a very good panel, and we will be discussing what's going on, how to integrate, how to scale up, what are the challenges. And again, as Diana said, please keep putting your questions in the chat box, and we will come back to those at the end of the initial intervention. So nature-based solutions, next slide, please. As we see, I will first share what IUCN has been doing in this sector so that you can see we've been involved in a number of projects all over the world. And that's critical to understand that, next slide, please, that disaster and climate change impact, they cannot be seen in isolation, because whatever is happening around us, that has an impact, how disasters impact us, how climate change impact us and everything, and how we respond to those. Next click, please. So that's why we cannot address it in a vacuum. Many a time we prepare in a silos, and that's where we go wrong, because it needs to be integrated into overall development and conservation paradigm. Next slide. And that's why IUCN believes that they're all interlinked. And unless and until communities, they have basic access to human rights and the health of the ecosystem, they are all interdependent. And that's where we need to bring in all the elements of human well-being. And that's why climate change and adaptation and then risk reduction can be taken into account properly. And many a time we try to see things in our specialized area. That's where nature-based solutions come into play, because they are trying to address livelihoods, socio-economic and ecological well-being. So all three elements, they need to be addressed concurrently. Next, please. And IUCN have been involved in a number of countries working on these projects where we are trying to reduce risk and enhance resilience. And in the last 10 years, we have experience of working over 100 projects in 94 countries with over 230 million just for project specific activities in these countries. And there almost $500 million is again coming together with partners and others who are working with us. Next, please. And you can see we've been working in all the regions and habitat types and different ecosystems, and that's given us a lot of experience to see what's working, what's not working, and that's what we are trying to integrate through this approach of nature-based solutions. Next, please. And all this experience which is being generated from the ground, evidence from the field, we are trying to inform and influence the policies. And next, and at the same time, next slide, please. While working in the policies, we also try to work at the practice level, because many a time, we all see the number of good policies are there and their implementation is handicapped when policies are not linked with the practice. So that's what we have been doing these days. And you can see like today, for the last 1.5 years, most of the capacity building and learning from each other is virtual. Next, please. So we all know, I won't go into the details of this, that almost half the world is underwater these days and half the world is burning. Things, many experts are saying we have crossed the tipping point, and so many things are happening which many times we question that healthy ecosystems, can they operate on their own, or we need to integrate technology, we need to bring in mainstream development into this. What happened in, say, British Columbia in Canada, resource rich country, good ecosystems and all this, and temperature hitting 50 degrees centigrade. In many developed countries, we have seen in Germany, in Belgium, in Houston, other flood is bringing havoc. So many disasters are going on. We need to have an integrated approach. And that's why it's critical that nature and technology and disaster and adaptation, we all bring in. Only addressing socioeconomic or ecological in silos is not working. Next, please. And next click, please. You keep clicking till we have. So that's where, the safeguarding nature and safeguarding society, that's critical. Next click, please. So, it's critical, as I keep repeating myself, and that's what is missing in 90% of the project we've been evaluating in the last 5-6 years, that either we are very good at socioeconomic level or biodiversity and natural resource. But we talk about all these elements, but when it comes into play on implementation on ground, many a time these elements missing or are marginalized. We need to bring in climate science, data, indigenous knowledge, and then local priorities. So that's where nature-based solutions, which are a common foundation, we all know nothing new, but it is a distinct approach in a way where we need to address them concurrently. That's the key message we are trying to build on nature-based solutions. Next slide, please. So that's how, again, you must have heard all this during this series also. Actions to protect and sustainably manage and restore natural and modified ecosystems to address societal challenges. As I said earlier, we cannot address climate change or risk reduction in isolation. We need to look into socioeconomic elements, local livelihoods, societal challenges, your and mine resilience, and all of us resilience is not just healthy ecosystems, it's also livelihood, it's also security, it's also looking into human access and rights, education, health. So all these elements and how we can bring them together if we have nature-based solutions with targeted element of societal challenges. That's how it is distinct, that we do know about all these things, but while we implement, we still are in silos. Next, please. So when we do the preparedness for disaster or climate adaptation, it's critical that all these elements are not only at the emergency response, but preparedness level, prevention level, and then recovery level also. We have seen, and again, I won't go into details, we will be discussing in the panel, that most of the resources, they go into response and recovery, but preparedness, prevention, that also require equal amount of investment and our help to look into nature and these issues and priorities and vulnerabilities and hazards at the same time. That's where we are then well prepared and can respond in a better way. Next, please. And that's the reason is that we all need to work together because we have specialized expertise and not one organization can address it on its own. That's why partnership, sustainable development element into this, those are critical. We have seen over the last half century or other, we all doing great work, but alone perhaps. Bringing them all together is the key, the first step to move forward in a realistic and holistic manner. Next, please. So the aim is to bring silos and break those and work together. It's easier to say than done. We have seen now new partnerships are emerging, but they need to be further strengthened. And that's what we will try to do today also, having experiences with expertise and our panel today, and then move forward. Next, please. So this is where I wanted to set the scene that we, need to work together. We have a lot of experience that is, perhaps if I can use the word, scattered all over the world, but both at policy and practice, we need to learn from each other, knowledge sharing, and then action, joint actions are critical. We have a wonderful panel today with whom we will be discussing what is going on in all this. But first of all, before introducing all the panelists, I must share that one of our panelists, Zita Sabzwari, who is the Deputy Director at the Institute of Environment and Human Security for UNU, and also the Chair for Partnership for Environment and Disaster Risk Reduction, PADR, had a family emergency and had to decline just today. So we hope everything gets better. So maybe in future she would join us. And we have Kaneke Sena. Has he been able to join us? Diana or Veronica, can you confirm? Okay, let me introduce other panelists then.
Everybody's here, only Zita is missing.
I see, okay. And then Tiziana Bonson is the Manager of Climate Migration and Resilience, the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies, IFRC. She has over 20 years of experience with the IFRC. Between April 2015 and June 2020, she led the migration and displacement portfolio and played a key role in the development of the IFRC Global Strategy on Migration, adopted by the IFRC General Assembly in November 2017. Then we have Mariko Watanabe, Attaché Permanent Mission of Japan to the United Nations Office, another international organization in Geneva, with a background and thesis on the international responsibilities regarding the protection of human rights in the event of disaster. Ms. Watanabe is advisor to the Japanese government, expert on environmental law and human rights. Then we have Ruben Holfiger, is the head of the Latin American Public Sector Solution Team in Swiss Re, responsible for supporting governments to build a strong risk management strategy Previously, he was a senior policy advisor for the World Bank on post-disaster budget execution and insurance for country clients. So in this first session, I would like to invite each of our panelists to give a brief initial intervention on the gaps and opportunities of nature-based solutions, what they are going on, and that will be followed by a moderated discussion, including your questions. So we will be hearing first from Kaneke Sana. Kaneke, over to you.
Thank you so much for inviting me to be part of this very important panel. And sorry for the trouble that I had joining. I hope you can hear me now. In fact, I'm using my phone. My computer has completely refused to join through WebEx. So indigenous peoples have been a key part of the discussion on nature-based solutions. And I want to thank you for highlighting the need to include social and economic aspects, including indigenous knowledge and local priorities and actions to protect, sustainably manage and restore natural or modified ecosystems that address societal challenges effectively and adaptively, while also simultaneously providing for human well-being and biodiversity benefits. So at the just concluded World Conservation Congress, a World Summit on Indigenous, and a World Indigenous People Summit offered a 6-point agenda for indigenous peoples to contribute to nature-based solutions. And number one, obviously, they emphasized on securing, recognizing, and respect for collective indigenous rights and governance of land, territories, resources, waters, coastal areas, and natural resources. In the CBD post 2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, the UNFCCC Paris Agreement, and IUCN Nature 2030 Agenda to promote the adaptation and implementation of right-based approaches and safeguards that ensure recognition, respect, and enforcement of indigenous rights. Secondly, enhancing the recognition and support for indigenous governance systems for the use, management, and conservation of natural resources. So this includes strengthening equitable and collaborative governance systems that ensure respect for rights, cultures, knowledge, livelihoods, among others, ending criminalization of customary livelihoods, and of course, working to eliminate nature-culture divide, because that is the trend now. We just focus on nature and then we forget the nature-culture divide. And the third thing that indigenous people observed is the need to strengthen measures to guard against threats to indigenous environments and environmental defenders in particular. And this includes by ensuring the respect for declarations by indigenous peoples of their territories as no-go zones for activities of extractive industries, and develop and implement systems of human protection and support for indigenous environmental human rights defenders. Further, indigenous people saw the need to promote and implement indigenous solutions to conservation. This is purely based on traditional knowledge of the indigenous people. So we have to ensure the inclusion of indigenous knowledge in all these processes at every level, from the grassroots all the way up to the international level, promoting the leadership of indigenous peoples in protected areas and conserved areas, and promote and support the development and implementation of indigenous systems of protected and conserved areas and the integration within national biodiversity strategies and budgets. So, and fifthly, increase and strengthen indigenous leadership in decision-making processes and access to resources, because this is a very big challenge, resources related to climate change and nature conservation. So this includes advancing and the design and implementation of community-led nature-based solutions and secure direct access to financing, to climate finance for indigenous climate initiatives. And finally, influence post-COVID-19 recovery and food security agendas to improve the indigenous livelihoods of improve the livelihoods of indigenous peoples. Of course, in all these that indigenous people came up with that global agenda, partnership plays a very strong key, because we know we cannot be able to do it alone. We have to work together. So we have a call for states, a call for conservation NGOs, a call for the private sector, and a call for indigenous people themselves. And that will be our contribution to nature-based solutions. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kanake. It's so critical that you spoke about indigenous knowledge and local human priorities, because that's the key. Indigenous people, they've been dealing with this disaster, climate, and other weather changes for centuries. So their knowledge is critical to be integrated into science and data so that there can be a holistic approach, and then also not maladaptation and other aspects. So we will come back to these during the discussion. Now we will hear from Tiziana Bonson and to see how scaled up work, because IFRC been working in almost 100 national societies, and the aim is that 2025 these elements can be further scaled up. So Tiziana, over to you.
Thank you so much, Ali, and thank you again for the opportunity to be part of this panel. It is indeed a great chance to be able to share a few reflections of how the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies and its 192 members, so almost a member in almost every country in the world, are indeed consolidating and scaling up. And I'm using the word consolidated because I believe that a lot has been going on for quite a while, in fact. The integration of nature-based solutions in our humanitarian work. Indeed, as an organization, but I would say the humanitarian sector at large has been increasingly moving from approaches that are only focused on responding to disasters and crises towards, the integration and addressing disaster risk reduction, looking more at anticipation, and including resilience building as an integral part of our humanitarian work. I have to say that in addition, the humanitarian sector as a whole is also working now to address in a more integrated way the consequences, the humanitarian consequences of the climate and environmental crisis that we're seeing every day, as you very eloquently described in your presentation at the beginning. We're seeing more and more disasters. They're more extreme and they're more intense, and they're affecting more and more communities. And we recognize that we have a role to play. On one hand, to reduce our own impact on the environment, but also to better understand how we can work with nature to increase the resilience of the most vulnerable. Just to mention maybe a recent process that I think is worth quoting here, we've been co-leading together with the ICRC, the International Committee of the Red Cross, a process to develop a climate and environment charter for humanitarian organizations, which was launched in May this year and has already been endorsed by over 150 signatories as a manifest to this commitment that I just mentioned. We need to play a role, but we need to do more to support climate change adaptation. So nature-based solutions are part of this, right? They are indeed a unique approach to resilience because it integrates environment and climate change agendas into our humanitarian work. You said it in your introduction. Nature-based solutions, they can provide multiple benefits that are particularly relevant when you think about building resilience, and especially in humanitarian context. They're not just relevant to reduce risks linked to hazards. They are relevant when we talk about helping communities to adapt to a changing climate, but they're also very relevant because they provide health benefits, livelihoods benefits, food and water security. So all of these things, they come together and they make sense to us as humanitarians. And as you said, they're relevant before, during, and after disaster, so throughout the disaster management cycle. This is why the IFRC has really integrated a specific target in its recent plan and budget for the period 21-25 that talks specifically about nature-based solutions. So it's not just something that we think we're doing, it's something that we want to explicitly look at. So we have a target that says that by the end of the period, 100 national societies would have integrated nature-based solutions in their disaster risk reduction, climate change adaptation, and mitigation work. So that we have a lot of work to do in front of us, of course, in supporting these national societies. But as I said at the beginning, we are really building on ongoing work. Allow me to quote what we're doing in Vietnam. We've been there for over 25 years, supporting the Vietnamese Red Cross to look at restoring mangroves, We're still doing it now. We're specifically focusing on the northeastern part of Vietnam, supporting coastal communities to provide the protection they need against typhoons and storm surges. But it's important to note here that, you know, this is a typical example of something that takes time. Right, 25 years, it's a long time. What is good for us to see is that the government has been taking up these approaches, is increasingly working with local actors and the communities themselves to build on those successes. We are now working in Jamaica, for instance, assessing, planning, and hopefully implementing reach to reef approaches and what we call living breakwaters, so that we can support communities to increase their livelihoods resilience, but also protecting them from storm surges and floods. Or we're using bioengineering solutions like vegetation terraces in Honduras to protect communities from landslides. So these are just some of the few examples that I wanted to share to show what it means in the communities integrating nature-based solutions. But let's acknowledge one thing. While on one hand, we all recognize the benefits, there are also a number of challenges and potentially barriers that we need to take into account, especially as humanitarian actors. And this means that we also need to look at ways of changing the way we work. Not only looking at things in a more integrated fashion, but think about, for instance, the issue of time. Humanitarians, they usually have interventions that are relatively short time because we focus on a disaster and responding to that particular disaster and helping communities to come back to their feet. NBS solutions, as I mentioned with the Vietnam case, they require longer term approaches with the necessary resources and funding that are not necessarily coming through the humanitarian envelopes channels, as you of course would agree. Scale is another element. Humanitarian work is usually focused on the sites of the disasters, specific target communities impacted by given disaster, while nature-based solutions, they need to have these more sort of a landscape approaches, system-wide, as you also refer to. This is why it's so important for humanitarians to bring their knowledge of the communities, their practices to the table and look at partnering with others, bringing in the expertise that comes from specific actors that are working in the environmental and climate sector, and really join efforts. As you mentioned, we need to break those silos and bring all of these targets and goals together by identifying indeed how we can do this. I would say, maybe just to conclude, together we need to work to build the case for nature-based solutions, because indeed they do require, as I said, a change in mindset. Nature-based solutions, not only they need to be integrated into resilience building work, but we need to advocate for the fact that they are effective and cost efficient to reduce the likelihood of climate and environment hazards that can become humanitarian disasters. So I'd like to end here. This is really to give you an overview of how we are approaching it from a humanitarian perspective. Thank you.
Thank you, Tiziana. It's wonderful to know that IFRC has been working in almost all countries, because that infrastructure is critical even to bring people and knowledge together and have integrated approach. So and I see many of us have been involved conservation sector, and that started working in disaster management. And see, when Asian tsunami happened and people saw that in coastal zone, mangroves, sand dunes played such a critical role. But humanitarian whole sector has been involved for almost 100 years, if we can say. So there's a lot to learn from them, and then also to offer what we've been doing and in conservation, and how unintentional maladaptation or things can be avoided. So we look forward working with you and having in the discussion a lot more how these hybrid solution bioengineering is working and what are the challenges in scaling up. So we will come back to that. Let's go to now one of the most prepared countries for disaster management, Japan. And for eco DRR, Japan is a champion who realized, and also the response to Japan tsunami was really wonderful, well integrated. So now over to you, Mariko Patabana, for your initial intervention.
Thank you, Ari. I hope you can hear me well right now. Okay, good. So, I have joined the Permanent Mission of Japan to International Organization Geneva in July only, and I am currently in charge of environmental affairs and as well as a part of human rights affairs here. And also, personally, I'm still doing my PhD in international disaster law in Strasbourg. So it is my honor to speak today about Japan's perspectives of nature-based solutions in the context of disaster. Next slide, please. Okay, so as you may already know, Japan is situated in one of the most disaster-prone areas, and we have always experienced several categories of the disasters, such as earthquakes, sometimes accompanied by tsunami, and volcanic eruptions, typhoons, heavy rain, etc., etc. So we have always had to live with disasters caused by natural hazards. At the same time, Japanese people have believed more or less that nature has a force that is beyond our control. So living in harmony with nature and making the most of it is actually a part of our traditional culture. So that being said, NBS or eco-DRR is not a new concept for Japanese people. Well, but that is about people's awareness. As to national policies, there is an event that made us feel the importance to include more comprehensively nature-based approach in the DRR policies. So this is the famous event of 2011, March 2011, the Great East Japan earthquake, well known for Fukushima, maybe, unfortunately. And it has completely changed our way of living and approach to disasters. And we have started to think of more sustainable ways instead of simply developing artificial infrastructure. So it has become more important to reflect such perspectives in the policies, national policies, local policies, and as we face and do fear the intensification of disasters, including disasters triggered by climate change. Next slide, please. Okay, so among our ecological and sustainable solutions in disaster management, I would like to point out two pillars. The first one is to protect explicitly some natural sites that may protect the population from future disaster risks, such as landslides and tidal waves, but sometimes violent sea winds. And you see also some wetlands that may protect us, actually protected us, Tokyo metropolitan area, from water-related disasters such as floods. Next slide, please. Okay, so the second pillar is to share and diffuse information and knowledge about the ecosystem functions as DRR measures and there is importance to the population. Well, we can say it is important to protect nature. Okay, that's fine, but it's not enough. We should say rather like it is important because it may protect us from disaster risks. So at the local level, inhabitants have been trying to develop tools to prevent future disasters while taking into consideration the local natural circumstances and also seeking better means for evacuation once the disaster occurs. So one of the outcomes in this context is the creation of maps. First, map to indicate natural sites that are potentially suitable for eco-DRR, which is called like potential maps. And we have also a so-called hazard map that each community or each city has already created and communicated to the population. And it is to show the risky areas and relatively safe areas in the event of disasters, according to the natural conditions of the community or local area. And our Ministry of the Environment has also prepared a handbook that you see here, a handbook on ecosystem-based DRR in Japan. And it is well written, so you can find it on the internet if you would like. Okay, thank you. Next slide, please. Okay, and it was a very short presentation, but if you are interested in, you can find more information on the website of the Ministry of the Environment of Japan. So thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Marika. It's really good to see examples from Japan, and we can see how governance element is critical in having an integrated and response that from national policy to the local policy and local government level, right investment is backed by the policy and then implementation where people are already well aware, but that investment is critical. So thank you for sharing your experiences. We will again come back. How did you achieve, which is quite rare than many other countries where from top to the bottom, environment has been integrated and disaster response because of being all the vulnerabilities, but right investment into nature is also going, and how ecosystems are responding to that investment and how you're coping with future disasters. Investment is critical, but at the same time, if return on investment is not there, public sector might not want to go into that investment, and same with private sector. So we are very happy that we have Swiss Re representation here, and Ruben will share with us how Swiss Re has been working to work with the government and trying to mainstream NBS. Yes, Ruben, over to you.
Thank you very much, Ali. Yes, indeed, we have heard a lot around how nature protects and why it must be preserved. Now I'm going to share with you a real case study of a successful public-private partnership work on the Mesoamerican reef that protects the Cancun and Riviera Maya. For those of you who know, this is the second biggest reef in the world. Is the biggest one in the Western Hemisphere. And what was the need at the moment? So as you may know, Cancun and the Riviera Maya is a multi-billion-dollar tourism hub by excellence, but is also extremely exposed to hurricanes. The local community realized a few years ago with several different hurricanes that impacted the region, that in those specific areas of the state of Quintana Roo in which the coral reef was healthy and thus grown, it acts as a natural barrier and protects the coastal economic activities. So they realized that that was a need to preserve and protect that natural asset. With that, the Nature Conservancy reached out to us in order to make a partnership together with the state government of the state of Quintana Roo and the federal government of Mexico in order to try to find a unique insurance solution that could help to protect the coral reef when a major event, a storm surge coming from a major natural hurricane would impact the area. And the response was to work on a parametric insurance solution. If we go to the next slide, please. Why a parametric insurance solution? Because when the coral reef is impacted by a hurricane, the need to go out there and restore the reef is an immediate need. So you need cash liquidity, immediate respond, so the local community can act immediately to collect the broken pieces of the coral, take them to nursery, and then replant it again. If you don't take action immediately, the reef will simply die, and it will take years and years for them to grow again. And if the reef is not, as I mentioned, well cared for and preserved, it won't act as a natural barrier and won't protect the coastal activities like the hotels, the beaches, the restaurants, and the water activities that you have in that region. So with that, we work on an insurance solution. As you can see in this slide, the main object was to have something that could act immediately, and thus we needed a permanent funding source. So it was decided to create a trust fund that would act with three main purposes. The first one was to have a permanent conservation strategy to maintain the beaches and maintain the reef, and take all the activities around risk reduction, restoration, avoid overexploitation of the natural areas by not having, pollution, making sure that the reef is and the water is not contaminated. And then also the second purpose was to have resources for taking care of the most frequent, less severe events, those hurricanes that doesn't have a major impact to the reef, but does need some actions to be taken of, and it's too expensive to transfer that to an insurance solution. And then the third purpose of this trust fund was really to buy insurance for NatCat events, those more severe, less frequent events, but those hurricanes that really have an impact to the reef, and thus you need an amount of resources in order to be able to help with the restoration. And then with that, this has been working for a couple of years now, and we have a proven case already. If we go to the next slide, with the design of a parametric coverage last year, Hurricane Delta proved that the structure worked. A hurricane impacted in October last year, actually a year ago, on the polygon that was set up for this insurance solution, and the payout was provided immediately after the event during the first 8 days, with whom the brigades, which were trained, the local community act as a brigades. They have manuals, again, that guidelines how to immediately respond. They were able to stabilize 1,200 colonies, which has been uprooted and collected and planted over 6,000 broken coral fragments, which many will now grow as new coral colonies. So in a nutshell, this is what we have worked as a real case, and this is the outcome of a very good proven case of a public-private partnership. Thank you.
Thank you, Ruben. This clearly shows that investing in nature does pay back. So again, we'll come back to you, Ruben, to see how insurance, which is very well established in developed countries or rich countries, how it's working in developing countries, and what are the challenges you are facing in mainstreaming it. So thank you, all of you, our panelists, for that brief introduction to your vast experience and perspectives on the opportunities and gaps of nature-based solutions for resilience building and enhancement. Before we shift to a brief video message and then to a moderated discussion, I would like to remind our audience and members to, put question in the chat. We will be asking our panelists a few questions and after this video. So back to you, Diana and others, for a video message.
We all know the last few years have not been easy. It's hard. It's hard to devote yourself to a cause that is so urgent and not be able to get the traction needed to make the change that is absolutely necessary. It's hard to read the headlines, floods, fires, famines, plagues, and tell your children that everything is all right. It's not all right. Damn it, it's not all right. We've got to make things happen. We've got to make it happen now. Come on, everybody. Let's get to work.
Thank you, Harrison Ford, for your championing of nature-based solution and the urgency to act now. As we all say and we all know that perhaps it's already too late. As I said earlier, half the world is underwater and other half is burning. So what sort of word we are giving to our children, or even to our, many a time we used to say, sustainable development for future generations. It's no more future generations. Our current generations are suffering. We are suffering, and especially the poor who don't have those coping mechanisms like people, in developed countries have. But still, now we have seen with the recent events that even in developed countries, people, governments, everyone finding themselves helpless against nature. So we need to work with nature and through nature to move forward. So I'll again come back to our panelists now, and let's start with Ruben. As I said, insurance is one way to safeguard on investment, and again we have seen very good examples are coming, and I trust some studies also where investing $1 saves $20, or its return on investment is 20 times more. But what are the challenges, especially where your work, the example for Mexico, how in a developing countries you are trying to mainstream insurance aspect, what challenges you are facing, and maybe some of the lessons where our audience and other organizations can take it forward. So Ruben, your intervention?
Sure, thank you. Yeah, I guess it's the challenge to have all stakeholders aligned and all stakeholders in the same path together in order to achieve goals. And I want to flag that standalone insurance is not the solution. You need a comprehensive disaster risk management strategy. And that was, I guess, the successful story in the case of Mexico, because it's not only about having insurance when a major event happens, but also having a permanent source of funding to maintain and conserve the coral reef, the natural based solution. And the creation of this trust fund, which has a permanent source of income coming from a portion of a federal tourism tax that is collected by municipalities. They agree to transfer a portion to this trust fund. So the trust fund has these capabilities of working on a permanent conservation, buying insurance coverage for more severe events, but also training the local community, which is extremely important. The community is aware of the need to have a safe and healthy natural asset, and then they are capable of going immediately out there to restore and collect the broken pieces and take them to nursery and replant it again. So I guess it's about a real effort of public-private partnership, everyone aligned, the hotel association, the local communities, the government, local government, federal government, NGOs like the Nature Conservancy, everyone, the private sector, everyone working together towards achieving a common goal. We have some other efforts across the globe in order to be able to do similar approaches, but it's unfortunately it's taking longer than expected, to take the next step and really put it into motion.
Okay, thank you, Ruben. As you are here, just one more question, and then we are getting a lot of questions now. There's a question that for the private sector, which element in a broad project, NBS project design, implementation, or monitoring, you think private sector is more suited to? Okay, when NBS project is going on, at what level private sector is more suited to fill the gaps or come together and provide a solution?
So this is a very important question because I've worked in the public sector and now I'm working in the private sector. I've seen from both sides on all aspects, and the reality is that the public sector cannot work alone, and neither the private sector can work and structure something alone. We need to work together to make things happen. The private sector has the willing to support, but sometimes, for example, who is the ownership of a natural asset? What is the historical data you have on previous events, and who is gonna, be pushing for things to happen? So it's extremely important that the parties are aligned and willing to do something. And yes, I definitely believe that the private sector is willing to do more, but it also needs the willingness, and it needs to be a topic on the public agenda for things to happen.
Thank you, Ruben. Any other panelist wanna comment on private sector and at what level of engagement, design, implementation, monitoring? Any other panelist? Okay, in this case, we have another question, and can I come to you? There is a question about engagement with youth and role of youth. So together with indigenous knowledge and people, what do you see, Kanike, that how youth can be engaged, and are you engaging youth? This is my question to Kanike, you, and also to Ziana, and then we'll come on other questions. Kanike, if you are speaking, you are mute. So till we sort out Kanike, because he was having problems, then Tiziana, you wanna comment on the role of youth in working on NBS?
Thank you, Ali. Yes, indeed. I mean, if I think of the amazing network of volunteers that we have around the world with, I think we have like 15 million volunteers working in almost in every community, and a lot of them be rather young, I would say, because it is part also of it's not just the passion and motivation, but also part of the experience that a lot of young people, there's a lot of motivation behind that. Youth can be an amazing asset in raising awareness, first of all, of what's going on, what the challenges are, mobilizing communities, schools. They can really be a driving force. I mean, we've seen with all of these manifestations on TV, but if they are driven, I would say, by the right approaches, the right principles, they can be a credible voice. They can be a real power. So first of all, raising awareness, but also playing a role themselves in engaging in specific campaigns and specific community work, and not just telling others what to do, not just asking governments to do something, but actually do something themselves. And this is the type of community work where youth can be mobilized.
Thank you, Tiziana. Yeah, it's critical. We also at IUCN, trying to engage with youth, because for the community work, it's critical that force is there, which keeps energize everyone to keep, because let's not forget, working with nature and environment and other, it takes a lot of toll, it's not immediate. There are sometimes not tangible benefits. You do the input and there is output at the desired level. It's always challenging. So working with all segments of society, youth, elderly, women, girls, all policymakers, everyone, that is the key. Because as I said, there is no one way of looking into this solution. We all need to come together. There are other questions also coming, and then use monitoring and evaluation. There's a question that how we can look into nature-based solution and real life aspect, how it's going on, because again, when people invest in an area where the benefits are quite long term, we have done many studies. If you invest, for example, in mangroves to protect you from cyclones, Sometimes it takes up to 10 years. In rangeland, they're sometimes 30 years, So how do you see and keep that real life? And that's the question that nature-based solution monitoring and digital technology can play a role. Let's start with you, Tiziana.
It's an excellent question. I'm not sure I have the answer, but certainly it prompts further reflections, because we need to show what success looks like, right? We have to find a way to demonstrate that it's worthwhile. And unless you have indeed a way to monitor and report on the achievements that you're trying to reach with whatever solution you want to implement, the trade-offs, the negotiations will probably not go in favor of NBS, but maybe going in favor of gray solutions, because they're quicker, they're more visible, you can immediately show the impact, when in fact, so understanding, what does success look like, and what are those indicators of success, and agreeing that yes, it may take longer, but at the end of the day, it's worth investing. It's going to be more cost efficient. It will be much more, there will be a real co-ownership around it, and it will be more sustainable, because we can only build worlds as high as we can think of today, but they may not be high enough tomorrow. So really having that, I don't have, as I said, the answer, but it's an excellent question. So how can we partner with those who can help us define frameworks and mechanisms to be able to say, yes, let's invest. These are the results you're going to get in 5 years, in 10 years, in 15 years. Is it just the flood protection, or is it something else? We keep talking about these multi-benefits. Let's identify those indicators that can allow us to show those other benefits that are coming out of NBS. So no quick answer, but certainly a relevant area of work, I would say, to further explore.
Thank you, Tiziana. Mariko, you mentioned, from the government, and then budgeting also being done, and also go from province and government, and then to the local level investment going on. So are you aware of what are the monitoring measures which are being put in place to see if the investment is going into the right direction and also reaping benefits?
Yeah, thank you. Good question. Me neither. I'm not sure you have the right answer, but let's say that it is rather members of each community or local people that would judge or say that we are in the right direction. It is not really a central government or a higher level that could say that our policies are well developed right now. So in Japan, at least, it depends on the community, really. Some communities are well developed or well prepared against, for example, tsunami, because of the natural circumstances, but not always maybe by heavy rain, let's say, or maybe Tokyo metropolitan area is not prepared against tsunami because there's not so the risk of not so high there. But we are always trying to prepare ourselves from the earthquakes, for example. So when we think of the right direction, the right thing to do against disaster risks, it's well, it depends on the natural circumstances, and it's very important to know in what kind of environment we are living in, and and trying to develop investigations from that perspective.
Right.
So
proper investment, and then putting in right indicators to keep assessing, monitoring. Ruben, in insurance sector and the private sector, it's so critical. So Ruben, if you can share also what measures Swiss Re has put, in monitoring and other.
No, sure. And I want to go back to the technology because I think it's
Yes.
extremely important. So for insurance, we rely heavily on technology. Just to give you an example, this parametric coral reef insurance is based on wind speed. The wind speed of a hurricane is what can triggers a payout. And there is no need for a loss adjustment on site. There's no need to define what is the total economic loss. You have it defined with pre-patterns in a contract, and the wind speed is measured by the National Hurricane Center. For example, in excess of rain or rainfall, excess of rainfall, we use satellite data most of the cases with different satellites from NASA and others. We are able to define what is the amount of rain that can really make damages, and that's you define the different levels of triggers, so you can define the amount of money that will be paid accordingly. Also with analysis that you do with historical losses. So we also have some automated tools in which you can, as a client of an insurance, for example, if you have an insurance portfolio, you can take a look at what assets are more exposed to flood, to hurricanes, to earthquakes. Even we have a layer of nature-based solutions in which you can see the overall globe where you have a more degraded situation within nature-based solution where you need to act now immediately. So technology plays an extremely important role.
Thank you, Ruben. And I could also share one example where Global Mangrove Alliance and partners, they are working. And you might have seen there is online Global Watch. So that also using real life data for all the work which is going on with the satellites and all this imagery and all those. So that's real life look into the restoration of mangroves, and that's online with the Global Watch. And you can see on Mangrove Watch, what is going on, and then the investment is resulting in positive output. Okay, we have a couple of other questions, and then I will come back to all of you with the key home message. National level policies. Maybe Mariko and Tiziana, coming to you, how to integrate NBS into overall national policy when priorities of the governments are more into infrastructure. And also how in Japan you were able, you mentioned that nature and working with environment has all been a priority of local people. But many a time we have seen in many other countries, and it's a generic one, that priorities are always into infrastructure where you can see tangible results, and sometimes very rightly so. Developing countries, poor countries, they invest with hospitals, with roads, with bridges. And why to invest in environment and nature? And how did you do in Japan? And then Tiziana, with you also same question, how to promote it? Yes, Mariko?
Oh, yep. Okay. Yeah, good question. But yeah, I'm wondering how Japanese people have developed this tradition. I mean, it's about long history since, yeah, centuries ago, maybe. But maybe what we could to do in maybe other countries for the people who are not really aware of the risk of natural hazards is well, maybe if I could understand if I feel personally the importance to do something against disaster risks is, I think it's because of the education actually that I have got in my childhood. So maybe it will be too late for the people, but the risk of natural hazard will be higher, higher and higher, especially with the ongoing climate change. So maybe the first step that we could do is we could take is tell the people, especially the children and the youth people, that I mean, there is a risk of natural hazards and that may cause a disaster. And then, but at the same time, we could do something against it. Like there is my favorite phrase is there is no such thing as a natural disaster. So we could tell this to the children through education. I think it's I'm not sure if it's my correct answer, but this is my one of my propositions.
No, Marika, you're right. Many a time, together with policies and legislation, human attitude and behavior is also critical, and that comes through education, awareness, and all this. It is because that's where many countries we see facing challenges, that there are policies, there is other, but enforcement, it is many a time is the individual political will that's missing, and that comes maybe through pressure of the voters, maybe because policymakers, as we all say, have a attention span of 4 or 5 years till next election, and that's why they invest in tangible thing, in jobs, in infrastructure. So if the pressure comes from the voters, education, youth, other from the very beginning, then perhaps policymakers will implement those policies. Tiziana, what's your experiences and exposure in having this challenge, and how to incorporate in national policy and then implement it also effectively with right investment budgeting?
So I would say that as humanitarian actors, and particularly the Red Cross and Red Crescent, that has this specific auxiliary role to governments in the humanitarian field, we have indeed as local actors as well, a very relevant entry channel to influence policies, regulatory frameworks, and bringing the voice of the communities into that conversation. We are now trying to really enhance the capacities of our members to engage on NAPs, national adaptation plans, because we believe these are very relevant entry points for ensuring that nature-based solutions are included. We're not saying it's easy. We do realize that sometimes as we mentioned before, there are these demands on authorities to show that they are efficient, that they are fast, that they are taking the right actions. And in front of that, we have nature-based solutions that require longer commitments. And so the trade-offs are not easy. But if we can systematically get the voice of the communities, their reading of what's going on, and their own approach into those conversations, this is really a key entry channel for us to be able to advocate and influence. But again, it has to be done together with other partners. So just saying this is what we see community level is not sufficient. We need to back it up with scientific evidence, with analysis, and to be convincing, at the end of the day. So, but this is what you said at the beginning. It requires multiple actors. We're working at multiple scales, in fact, and it's not just a small project in a very, very limited area, right? It has implications at different levels. This is why probably it's not that easy to implement.
Yeah. No, thank you, Tiziana. These are the challenges, and that's why the reason we are having this discussion, and there are so many others, knowledge sharing and all this, and because the challenge is still there. You're right. It's not easy. Had it been easy, we wouldn't have been in this business, because there are issues, there are things, and long-term and broad areas. At least now we perhaps know what we should not be doing. One is we cannot achieve things while just working in our own area.
Absolutely.
Poverty reduction cannot be, addressed effectively if biodiversity conservation and ecosystems on which rural, especially rural economies and mega economies are also dependent on agriculture, fisheries, forest, so everything needs to be done. Similarly, resilience cannot be done in isolation in a vacuum. So that's where, it is multi-sectoral, multidisciplinary approaches, where we need to, and that's where the challenge lies. As you are here, another question is about cost effectiveness. And Ruben, I will also come to you because that's also very critical for insurance and private sector. Cost effectiveness, that's also a very important question. How we can look into that when you investing on nature. We discussed it during some of the discussion and some alluded to was this issue. It takes time, it's not immediate that you invest into nature, you will have immediate benefits. And the policymakers, in developing countries, why to invest into mangroves, for example, and not in a seawall, because seawall will just be there and will protect the, communities against surges of cyclone and storm and other thing. So not easy answer, I understand. And many a time we have done studies, it takes, years, to get the benefits and tangible benefits. So what would be your reaction to this cost effectiveness of nature-based solutions?
As you mentioned, Ali, this is not an easy question. I would say that risk reduction, prevention and risk reduction are extremely important measures. We have seen cases in which policymakers have realized that constructing walls, gray areas, it's not enough, because at some point the wall will be destroyed and then an entire community, city, region will be flooded. And we've seen after major significant floods, how they are shifting the efforts of building these levees and high walls and focusing more on mangroves, the forest, reforestation, how the water can be captured by the soil, how can they, have better drainage of the rivers, the canals, and making much more natural things around that, instead of just putting more gray areas around the water. And why is risk reduction important? Because at the end, there's a point in which investing in prevention and reduction, $1 more will be more costly than transferring the risk. There's a point in which you get to a certain point in which you have invested enough, and it's moment that you use risk transfer solutions for the residual risk. Remember, it's you will never get rid of risk. There's always going to be a residual risk, in which when you get to the point of the residual risk, it's better to go and get a risk transfer solution instead of investing more money on something. But I guess the important thing is finding the right approach, in which how much should I invest on risk reduction and preventive measures, and then at the point in which I feel already comfortable and knowing that there is always going to be a residual risk, I transfer that to the international markets for them to take care of those, let's say, once again, those very severe events, but much less frequent.
Okay. Ruben, there is another question just directed towards you, that, coral reefs are productive, so there is, investment to safeguard that productivity. What about the livelihoods of vulnerable population and supporting their income and livelihoods? Would the insurance could also be available to poor, and how need assessment and valuation to exposure can be done?
Yeah, so it's very important to remember the objective and the purpose of insurance. Insurance purpose is to provide protection against sudden, unforeseen, and unexpected events. So we always have this colloquial phrase in insurance that you won't insure, it won't cover a burning house because it's already, the event has already happened. There's no one can cover something that is already happened, because you're really taking a risk analysis and putting a price tag to it. And if that already happened, it's the price will be above the value of the asset. So that's the first thing that is very important to understand. The second one is, yes, there is other types of insurance that can provide protection to the livelihood. And for example, if there's another type of climate risk related to the support and of the income and livelihood of vulnerable population, we can try to assess and try to make some sort of an innovative risk transfer solution. To give you an example, we are working in Peru with the fisheries sector in Peru. So climate change is making the oceans to get warmer. So when there's a El Niño, La Niña event that comes, you know that when that happens, the ocean will be warmer, and that the anchovies will not be, they will go far deep into the ocean. So Peru is one of the biggest exports of anchovy to the world. And when the ocean is warmer due to climate change, the local fishermen are not able to go all the way out to the sea where they will find the anchovy, because simply those boats are not prepared to go that out into the ocean. So what we have put together is an insurance coverage in which, when the ocean, so one of the index parametric sets or triggers are, if the ocean levels are warmer than X degree, you know in advance that the anchovies will be well far away, and the local fishermen won't be able to capture and bring back for exports. And then you get a payout, an indemnity payout due to that fact. So this is something that we are putting together. But once again, it's because you know that this not happens every year. If the temperature of the ocean is getting higher every year, then you can simply have a risk transfer solution, because you know it's going to pay it year after year. You have to have a risk component into that there is an unforeseen and unexpected event that will happen in the future.
Thank you, Ruben. Tiziana, any comment or reaction to cost benefit and on investing on nature-based solutions?
I was just listening to Ruben's example in Peru. It's quite fascinating to see how you can really leverage insurance. And I think where we try to intervene here often is making sure that we don't just understand the risk, but that we understand the impact. And I think it's very important to understand what level of impact a given risk may have on communities, and what can be done to maybe build their own ability to withstand the event or overcome the risk, what level of capacity is required, and where the investment should go. So it needs, I see them very much connected, but it's a fascinating example, the one from Peru. I would say maybe on the cost effectiveness, it's, to me, maybe in a very simple way, is to be able to tick many boxes. It's a little, what we were saying before, it's the multiple benefits of NBS. And so this is where you can say, well, there you go, livelihoods, water protection, protecting an environment, you have indigenous people living, so you social issues that are being addressed by this. So by ticking multiple boxes, you have the effectiveness. Right. It's not just about money, right?
All right, thank you. Now let's, I'll invite you all to have a 1-minute take-home message. What's the key thing, if you can, share with our audience, that how to move forward with take-home message. Tiziana, let's start with you.
Sorry, I didn't hear your final point. Sorry.
Sorry, the take-home message. Any last point you wanna add?
I have to say there's definitely a need to continue to learn more about nature-based solutions, and I can certainly say this for the humanitarian organization I'm part of. What we've been doing always, that nothing new under the sun, and what is actually new, what is different, so that we can certainly embrace what comes also from science, from technology, and improve the approaches that our communities are implementing. At the end of the way, at the day, this is what it needs to make sense. So I would say, let's continue to learn together, to cross-share, and this event is part of this process. So thank you again.
Thank you, Tiziana. Wonderful. Mariko, any last point you want to add?
Yeah, thank you. I completely agree that we have to continue learning and collecting information but sometimes it comes from the technology-based knowledge or information. But I could say that personally, I see also the importance of listening to something like the knowledge of our grandparents, for example, the local people, that maybe they may know much better than the government, local governments, about how to protect us from natural hazards. So even in this context, we can continue learning.
Thank you.
Thank you.
In a way, you also covered, Kaneka, perhaps last message that indigenous knowledge, traditional knowledge need to be integrated with climate and science. Thank you, Mariko. Ruben, last message, any last point you want to add?
For me, the key takeaway is to shift from theory to practice. We need to put things in motion. Much has been said and done on the research side. There's a lot of information, documented researches on how nature protects and why it must be preserved, but we are lacking execution. And we need, all stakeholders need to get together to start executing what is already in paper. That will be my takeaway.
Thank you, Ruben. I thank you all, Ruben, Tanzania, Mariko, and Kanike, to be here with us. It's critical, as you all said, we need to put theory into practice. We need to bring in indigenous knowledge. We need to have science-based, data-driven decision-making. We need to work interdisciplinary and intersectoral approaches, because climate change and associated disasters and other, it's a moving target. You prepare one community for flood management, tomorrow after 2-3 years there will be drought. So it's very difficult, and project oriented approach can just perhaps organize communities and demonstrate what is working, what's not working. But we need to bring in, for scaling up, national level policies and their implementation. We need to bring in private sector. We need to make these solutions so that return on investment is there. We need to have that cost effective. So it's a challenge. There are success stories in bits and pieces, but scaling up, moving forward together at the policy and theory and practice, that's critical. And we all need to learn together. I trust in today's session, we learned something from each other. If nothing else, at least this thing that we still need to learn more. So thank you very much. Back to you, Diana.
Thank you very much, Ali, for the excellent work you did today, and to all our panelists, and to also all attendees who have stayed with us until now. Just a few words to remind you, yes, that the summary, the takeaways of this event will be available on the webpage of this event as always. That also the video of this event, and that the next session will focus on cities. October is known to be the urban month, with a lot of activities around habitat and cities. And actually, ahead of the Cities Day on 25th of October, we will be discussing the role of nature-based solutions in cities and what they offer. And with that, we will now conclude our session. For those who are interested in other topics than just nature-based solutions, we are also holding a series of events. This week, you have the side events to the Aarhus convention and its protocol, and a few other things coming up in the next days. And in the context of the climate conference, the UN Climate Conference in Glasgow, COP26, there is also going to be a general briefing with the UK mission that is going to be hosted next week on Thursday. And we hope to feed also some of the conversation with some of the outcomes of these dialogues. With that, thank you all, and warm thanks from all the teams that have worked behind the scenes to organize this event.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.